Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I'm not here to speak. I'm here to listen and learn, so I'll be very, very brief. And let me first start by congratulating you all. I've witnessed, as you just said, the very beginning of the strategy 6 years ago. I look at Raoul, at Philip. I remember at that time there was still some political resistance to the idea of a national strategy in Switzerland. So the progress has been remarkable. Congratulations, and also congratulations for everything you have done globally, because many of you have made decisive contributions to the overall progress in the fight against HIV, hepatitis, and TB. I'd just like to make 4 quick points. The first is that hepatitis C, hepatitis B, have really been now mainstreamed in global health. And that, I think, is an achievement of the last 5 years, something recent. I'm not sure the next replenishment conference of the Global Fund will lead to an expansion of the mandate of the Global Fund to hepatitis, but I'm not sure this is necessarily a bad thing or bad news. I see more and more countries actually taking national initiatives, taking on national funding for hepatitis, and I see more and more countries that now have HIV and hepatitis national programs, or HIV, TB and hepatitis, or HIV, hepatitis and STI programs. And that is where the wind blows now. The 2 key words in Geneva and in global health are these days integration and decentralization. And this will be the main theme of the Alma-Ata or Astana conference that will be held this very week in Kazakhstan with the 30th anniversary of the Alma-Ata Declaration. Certainly the pendulum will sort of go back to a focus on primary care and decentralized care. My second observation is, as I mentioned earlier, how struck I am by the progress here in Switzerland. In just, I think the launching meeting of the Swiss program was in 2012, 14, even younger. Okay, so just remarkable. And I'm wondering what is it that actually led to the decision and to that dynamic? Is it the public health argument? Is it the economic argument? Raoul, I remember you were insisting on this. Is this because everyone was sort of mainstreaming hepatitis and Switzerland could not stay away from this? Is it Swiss pragmatism? I don't know, but maybe there are lessons to learn from that when it comes to our advocacy in countries that have not yet put hepatitis as a priority in their programs. My third observation is the gap, which we will be discussing. Of course, a huge gap if you think of the 71 million people estimated to be infected with Hep C, or the, and that is a figure that struck me, over 6% people knowing their HIV status worldwide that are actually co-infected with Hep C. And the gap in this region, or what WHO calls the Euro region, which is one of the regions with the highest prevalence, the gap is there. And I don't know how we should look at that gap. On the one hand, the gap is absolutely huge. On the other hand, just think about where we were 5 years ago, and now we have diagnostic tests at less than $1, and we have treatment as less than $200. per patient in some parts of the world. So I think the hepatitis community will fall in the same challenge as we have been going through and are still in the HIV community, which is where is the right language? If it is a language of progress and success, then politicians will say, okay, you're doing well, thank you. If it's a language of concern, the gap is huge. Then the language is, come on, look at all the money we're already given to you and all the efforts we've made. And just look at how the HIV these days, the HIV community is not, I think, actually finding the right language. And we have to look for that right language all together, also with the TB community. I was a few weeks ago in New York at the first high-level meeting, United Nations high-level meeting on TB, and what struck me is how fragile what we call the political commitment of the international community may be. Actually, the leaders of the countries that had said they would commit to TB, Russia, India, didn't show up at the summit. And as you know, and this is relevant also to hepatitis, of course, and to the drugs to come, the final declaration says countries should, explains how countries could and may profit from the TRIPS agreements, but does not recommend to countries to actually implement the agreements and the various options that can be offered to low and middle income countries to access what are drugs under patent. And my last observation is to say that it is remarkable that the first section of this afternoon will be on key affected populations and people at high risk, people who inject drugs, people who use drugs intranasally when it comes to hepatitis, MSM, prisoners, and we know that in Europe, particularly in the eastern part of Europe, hepatitis, HIV, TB, MDR-TB, and injection of drugs is really the perfect storm with a hugely negative impact on global health. And here, I think, is where the hepatitis world can learn from the HIV world and its long-standing commitment to key affected populations, with the realization that nothing will happen in terms of access to services and care unless we really put human rights at the forefront of everything we do. And so I'll just end these few words by reminding you of 4 human rights that are in the text of the 1948 Declaration of Human Rights and in subsequent treaties, and that are very relevant to our joint work. The right to health and to decent care. The right to privacy. The right to non-discrimination. The right to not be discriminated. And finally, the right to benefit from the advances of science, which is something people don't realize is a human right. So these are universal rights, but they're also the rights of the people at risk and affected by Hep C and hepatitis, and I think we should keep that in mind as we move into the afternoon. Thank you very much.